Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin. We, of course, have been covering the results of the election, and former President Donald Trump has now been reelected and is going to be the 47th president of the United States. He is the president-elect, is what we should say. And here's a look at his watch party in Florida just last night. And there's already a lot of reaction coming in from across the state of Georgia as well, which is where I want to point you to AtlantaNewsFirst.com and Atlanta News First Plus, where you can see some of that reaction. And I should say that among the top reactions, of course, getting a lot of attention right now is Governor Brian Kemp sharing on X, "Congratulations to President-elect Donald Trump. We look forward to working together to put hard-working Americans first and get our country back on track." And of course, Georgia, a battleground state, was just really an important part of this victory. And remember that former President Trump lost Georgia in 2020, but won this time by some 120,000 votes. Atlanta News First Don Shipman has more.
It was a long night for those election workers inside there, a long night for voters watching and waiting for those results. And now people on both sides of the aisle are hoping to heal election wounds.
We will make America safe, strong, prosperous, powerful, and free again.
Well before securing the necessary 270 electoral votes, paving a path for a second term in the White House, a confident former President Donald Trump claimed victory overnight. The Associated Press officially made the call hours later, shortly after 5:30 in the morning.
I'm happy. I think Trump's going to do a better job.
Many woke up to the news of President-elect Donald Trump. In poll after poll, Americans like Charlie Bowman of Cherokee County for months overwhelmingly said that they believed the country was headed in the wrong direction. Now, with 4 more years of a Trump presidency, Bowman feels more optimistic.
Well, I hope gas prices come back down. That'll help all prices come back down, and then just more money in my pocket. Maybe be able to save a little more.
I can't understand it. I really don't.
That optimism is not shared by Fred Woodall of Fulton County, who voted for Vice President Kamala Harris.
Even though we had record numbers in early voting, I don't think enough people just went out and voted, to be honest with you.
More than 4 million Georgians voted early, with more than 1 million more voting on Election Day. In fact, Fulton County alone broke 2020 records for in-person voting on Election Day, with more than 92,000 people casting ballots at the county's 177 polling locations.
I think we have to be open-minded.
Beverly Average, a Fulton County resident of 10 years, says while she voted for Harris, she's willing to hear out the other side.
And America is struggling financially. So people are looking more at their finances. A lot of people are making business decisions. And business decision trumps personal decisions.
Success will bring us together. I've seen that.
And now that the ballots are counted, workers here are focusing in on those provisional and absentee ballots that have to be processed by Friday. In Fulton County, Don Shipman, Atlanta News First.
So, of course, it wasn't just the presidential race that had to be decided during this election, but also other races, including for Fulton County DA and District Attorney Fani Willis has won her bid for re-election. She was challenged by Courtney Kramer, a Republican who actually interned with the White House counsel's office during former president, now President-elect Trump's presidency, and is active in many GOP organizations. And of course, we know that Ms. Willis has led the prosecution of former President Trump. So, this is getting, of course, more complicated. I would say that's an understatement. Joining us now to break some of this down, we have attorney at law Josh Schiffer joining us. And Josh, so both Ms. Willis and Mr. Trump winning re-election. And wow, what's going to happen with this case?
Yeah, it's a whole new set of chapters in the ongoing saga of President-elect now, Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, being prosecuted by our chief prosecuting authority here in Fulton County, Madam D.A. Willis, who yesterday brought home a resounding victory, absolutely reestablishing her mandate as the chosen top prosecutor here in Fulton County. Now, she did lose a couple of ticks of points to Courtney Kramer. Courtney Kramer had put the prosecution of YSL and similarly the prosecution of President-elect Trump central in her campaign. Those obviously being two of Fani Willis's most notable cases. And Courtney Kramer basically ran on the fact that Fani Willis is prosecuting these two cases, and Courtney Kramer believed those were a waste of resources and assets and that there are other problems with Fani Willis's office. That did get Miss Kramer a couple of points in the overall election, but Fani Willis came in at almost 70%. That's a substantial mandate for any local prosecutor. So what happens next? Well, after last week's rock star pleas in YSL, we're down to just those two final defendants facing very serious charges, similar but different than those of Young Thug and the other co-defendants who took those pleas over the last couple of weeks. And Judge Paige Reese Whitaker has kept that trial moving. We have seen more witnesses over the last several days than what feels like weeks and or months previously, and the state is moving quickly now that they don't have to prove all the elements with those related co-defendants. At the same time, it's just a cleaner and easier case without the notoriety, without the space, without the asset allocation that's needed. And who knows exactly how long the case is going to last, especially after we saw something that's a first in my entire legal career. Yesterday, we saw that juror stand up and speak against the state about their biases in open court, something unheard of, basically, in criminal prosecution and defense. But that's just one of Miss Willis's issues.
Yeah, so let's talk about this Fulton County election interference case here, which of course is what kind of put Miss Willis on the map in kind of a national sense. And a lot of questions about what's going to happen with that. We know that Judge McAfee has not set a trial date at this time, so that, of course, is something that we're watching for. But there's also the federal election interference case, which has been postponed. And then on top of that, we've got the New York hush money case and sentencing actually set for later this month, November 26th. So we got a lot of moving parts here. And then there was that Supreme Court ruling regarding presidential immunity that, of course, the Supreme Court decided or ruled that presidents have immunity for official acts taken while in office, but not for unofficial acts. In short, though, it doesn't really matter if he's president at the time that the prosecution is happening. It matters if he was president at the time that the alleged incidents happened, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it might be easiest to just kind of take these cases one at a time. And remember, as soon as Donald Trump assumes the presidency this coming January, there's going to be a sea of change at our major federal agencies, specifically the Department of Justice. And everyone expects incoming President Trump to clean house over at the DOJ. Jack Smith, who's been managing the special prosecution, nobody expects him to keep his job. He may as well start sending out CVs, and that case will almost certainly be dismissed upon orders of whatever new attorney general President-elect Trump is going to install. That's a big deal. It involves the case down in Florida as well as the case in District of Columbia. It's also going to point a spotlight on Judge Cannon down there in Florida. She now is going to be recognized as being someone who influenced the success of President-elect Trump, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see her name mentioned. In fact, I've already seen it for additional federal appointments or additional justice-related jobs. There are a lot of jobs to fill in these federal prosecuting agencies. We are almost certainly going to see a change in leadership here in Georgia, the Northern District almost for sure. That's going to bring in some of these state issues. Let's do New York first. This month we have two big issues in the New York case. To remind everyone, former President Trump was convicted of multiple felonies, 34 involving undue influence and manipulation of the elections, involving the payment to Stormy Daniels, and all of those actions we remember. Now, a couple of interesting side notes. The clerk in that court, Judge Merchan's clerk, she won her election yesterday. She is now going to be a sitting New York judge. That's a fascinating change. But back to the actual case, the two big issues pending immediately within the next 30 days are a review of the conviction in lieu of the Supreme Court's ruling that former President Trump enjoyed immunities while in office during the election process, and that may invalidate or make untenable the convictions that issued from New York. So there's that review, and then, of course, there's the actual sentencing due at the end of this month, with big questions involving the supremacy clause of the Constitution, whether this prosecution can continue in any way, whether there needs to be a pause, or whether this case is going to fully and completely be dismissed and the conviction voided. This is a novel legal issue. We have never had someone with the position, power, prestige, and future work of former President and future President Trump being in this predicament. So we really are treading brand new ground. Now,
And we know that the arguments in the New York case are essentially that Mr. Trump was not acting in an official capacity in some of the in the acts for which he's been convicted. That would be the argument by prosecutors. And as you mentioned, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records are what he was convicted on in May in New York in that hush money trial. But what it sounds like you're saying is it still remains to be seen whether he's actually going to be held culpable, because of course now you have the Supreme Court ruling that came down earlier this year regarding presidential immunity, and it's got to be something that's debated and reviewed by the court whether in fact the prosecutor's arguments are correct that these were unofficial acts. That's got to be determined. Were they official? Were they unofficial acts?
Absolutely, and that review, of course, is going to be subject to another form of appeals, and you're going to hear this time and time again. The appellate court and the time involved, that just grinds all of these processes into the mud. They're not moving forward with any kind of speed that is effective to actually change things here in the political landscape. Any of these appeals would happen after former President Trump is reinstalled and re-inaugurated as the President of the United States here in January.
And it sounds like for the federal election interference case, you believe that essentially, if you will,
stick a fork in it, my friend. And it's flippant, because you've got to understand the enormous amount of work and effort that's been put forth by federal, state agencies, prosecutors. These are longstanding, hardworking people doing their job, and politics has changed the meaning and import of their job, and it has taken their goal, which is to prosecute people, and completely turned it on its head. We've never dealt with issues like this. We are going to see some novel and new rulings, interpretations of everything from our Constitution through our federal record of laws that affect all of us nationally, and even down into state laws, because New York and Georgia is going to deal with, for the first time, with how a former and then sitting president can be prosecuted using state authorities.
Yeah, and so that's the big question. I mean, we've been talking now for a few minutes about what's happening in New York and what's happening with the federal election interference case. What about here in Fulton County, in the state of Georgia? And of course, we know that Fulton County is not always representative of the state of Georgia when it comes to folks, voting, quite frankly, and where people's beliefs and their political views fall. Mr. Trump won Georgia.
Yeah, we watched last night. I was pinned to my friend Mr. O'Keefe, standing right here's Twitter feed all night, watching the blue blob of Atlanta and the Metro Atlanta really dominate the conversation politically here in Georgia. Was Miss Harris going to be able to motivate enough people to come out and vote? The answer to that is no, with her vote tallies in Georgia being down substantially from President Biden. Was Donald Trump able to rally enough voters to come to his support? And he absolutely was. We saw the red counties in Georgia, primarily rural, become more red and more firmly entrenched as Donald Trump support zones, whereas the suburban counties immediately surrounding Atlanta are more blue than ever. The purple phase appears to be over, and we have more firmly than ever a blue dot representing progressivism and the left in Georgia, centered on Atlanta, and then the rest of the state. So how does Fani Willis proceed? She's promised to prosecute anybody and everybody that violates the law in Fulton County, and has been unmitigated in her position that Donald Trump violated the law with his phone call. We all remember the famous phone call with Secretary of State Raffensperger about finding those votes, the over a dozen co-defendants still on trial, and then we've got the actual case against Trump at the center of that. We are waiting for a Court of Appeals decision due at the end of this year regarding whether Fani Willis can even prosecute the president. And that ruling from the Court of Appeals is almost guaranteed to be then appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court. And who knows, we might even see a U.S. Supreme Court case after that. But that's just that specific Trump appeal.
But I want to ask you a question about that. So even if the ruling is that Fani Willis can no longer prosecute the case, that doesn't mean that the case goes away, correct?
Absolutely. Fani Willis still has an opportunity to appeal the ruling of the Georgia Court of Appeals and would probably directly appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court unless for some reason she wanted to try to make it federal, but almost certainly it would stay a state Supreme Court issue. She would appeal that, trying to retain the power of local district attorneys to prosecute people who allegedly committed crimes in their jurisdiction, regardless of whether they have a certain federal position or not. And she's basically put all of her eggs in that basket. She's going to move forward. And at the same time, that's just Donald Trump's case. She has, I believe, 15 co-defendants remaining that don't benefit from the immunities claimed by President Trump and his lead counsel, Steve Sadow. Those co-defendants, there's nothing preventing Judge Scott McAfee from moving forward with a prosecution. That creates the optics of, during Donald Trump's first year or two in office, having his actions and friends and supporters, his confidants, having all of their actions splayed open on camera out of a Fulton County courthouse. That's a fascinating set of optics. It would create some challenges for an effective presidential administration, as well as provide a lot of grease to his detractors. Whether Judge McAfee elects to proceed and move the case forward quickly or slowly, that's up to him. Obviously, I believe Fani Willis is going to push to continue prosecuting these co-defendants at a reasonably quick manner that's politically beneficial to her. But I also want to talk about the big craziness in the background, which is this. Fani Willis has been accused by many people of illegally using her position to manipulate politics, to unduly influence elections here in Georgia. And there are the beginnings of rumors about what kind of federal oversight are we going to see in the Trump administration incoming regarding local prosecutors and how they can affect national politics.
Okay.
Fani Willis is going to be a big example of that, and we'll keep a close eye on any management, scrutiny, regulation of those local district attorneys.
I have one other question. So we talked about the fact that if the ruling comes down that Ms. Willis cannot prosecute the case, of course, she can challenge that. But I have another question. What if that is upheld? What hypothetically speaking, that she cannot prosecute the case? Isn't there an option that another prosecutor can salvage the case, that this case can still go forward with another prosecutor taking the lead?
Yep, and now we're getting to the disqualification portion of the appeals pending in front of the Georgia Court of Appeals. One of the appeals relates to whether D.A. Willis, because of the relationship with Mr. Wade, needs to be removed completely from prosecuting the case, at which point the case would be referred to the Prosecuting Attorney's Council of Georgia, headed by Pete Scandalakis, former district attorney, a longtime political actor, deeply respected and understood. And this is similar to what happened with the Lake and Riley case out of Athens, Clark County, where the Prosecuting Attorney's Council of Georgia will step in as basically the local prosecutor and assign a prosecutor to review the case. Now, when that happened previously with the former employee, or sorry, I'm trying to remember the exact relationship to the Charlie Bailey issue, but one of the other co-defendants was severed from the case, sent to PAC because D.A. Willis could not prosecute him due to her holding a fundraiser, and that individual's case was dismissed. It basically, the DA's or the Prosecuting Attorney's Council of Georgia said, there's not a case here. We're not going to proceed. And at that point, without state action, it's dead in the water. Should the prosecution of former President Trump and his multiple co-defendants be referred to the Prosecuting Attorney's Council of Georgia, I expect they would not proceed with as aggressive a prosecution, or maybe even any prosecution at all. of former President Trump and these co-defendants.
All right. Well, any final thoughts, Josh, before we let you go?
It's history in the making, and I know people are anxious and scared, but we have seen and dealt with worse. What makes us more similar is far more important than what makes us different, and I'm excited that we have a firm conclusion to an election. That firmness, that's important for our system.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. Josh Schiffer, Atlanta-based attorney at law. Really appreciate your insight and analysis. Of course, we're going to be covering all the latest on this. If you haven't done so yet, please download our free Atlanta News First app to get updates sent right to your phone. Thanks for